This is not worm tea. This is vermicastings leachate. It isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's got a good amount of humic and fulvic acid and potentially some good microbes, but you need to be careful with this if you use it on your plants because it can do harm. Worm tea, on the other hand, also called compost tea, is an aerated substance that ensures that you're adding beneficial microbes to your plants and soils. It's pretty simple to make if you have the right components. Let me show you how. Okay guys, so we have our 5-gallon bucket. This is what we're going to be brewing the aerated compost vermicast tea. This is an extremely simple process. All you need is a bag like this. This is a 5-gallon mesh strainer, a 5-gallon bucket, some compost or vermicompost or both, and some molasses. How this works, just like you'd make a cup of tea, this is the tea bag. The tea leaves, if you will, are the compost or the vermicastings. The molasses is a food for the microbes in there. And what we're gonna do is, this is very simple, so I'm just gonna put some compost in this bag. I'm gonna mix compost. This is some finished compost that I have. I'm just gonna do a big handful, really doesn't take much. And then I'm gonna add some worm castings. So I'm just gonna use 4 ounces of worm castings. I'm just gonna put that in there. Worm castings go a little bit further. And if you stopped right there, then you're good. You just need to add a little bit of molasses. So I'm just gonna actually add this molasses into the bottom of the bucket. And I'm just gonna add like a tablespoon. That's probably perfect, a tablespoon of molasses. So I've got my bag with my compost. It's basically the inoculant for the compost tea. And I could do just this, but I'm actually gonna add a couple other ingredients. Now, if this is what you have, this is all you need. This and some water, which we'll add later. But I'm also gonna add just a little bit of sea salt. Sea salt gives some trace minerals. So just like probably 5 grams there. I'm gonna add a little bit of my liquid fertilizer, my natural fertilizer, probably just a tablespoon of each of these. I'm gonna add some of my mineral extract. This is extracted calcium and phosphorus in apple cider vinegar. And then I'm gonna add some lactic acid bacteria, some LAB. These things are just gonna kind of add some food for the microbes, add a little bit more diversity of microbes. It's gonna just enhance the brew. Again, a little tiny bit goes a long way. This is mostly food for the microbes, for the fungi and bacteria in there. Now the last thing I'm actually gonna add to my bag, I've got 3 comfrey leaves, and you can add as much comfrey as you want. Comfrey, again, just an optional addition, but comfrey goes a long way toward imparting nutrients. This is gonna be great nutrients for the microbes and for the brew. So I'm gonna actually just tear these up a little bit and put them in the bag. All of this is totally optional, but I just kind of want to give you a sense of what you can do. There we go, here's my bag. I'm gonna just kind of attach it right there. And now it's just gonna hang off the side of the bag, and I'll fill this up with water. I'm just gonna water the bag to make sure that it gets all fully saturated if possible before the water rises to it. And that helps dry out some of the humic acids and fulvic acids in the compost and the vermicastings. What's really important, actually, also I should say about the water that I'm using, we've got this wand hooked up to our filter that filters out chlorine and chloramine. Chlorine is really important to not have in here because it will kill the microbes. It kind of defeats the whole purpose. So it'll kill the microbes in the compost. It won't help your compost tea actually impart any sort of beneficial nutrients or microbes to your soil and your plants. So I'm just gonna fill this bucket up most of the way. I'll give it a little bit of headroom. And so actually one more thing, this is just a little trick while the bucket is filling up. I'm gonna actually take this bag, the paint strainer, off, and I'm just gonna put a rock in there, and that's gonna help weigh it down because I want this to stay submerged in the water, in the tea, through the whole 24-hour brew. Again, this will probably go, we're just gonna check in on this 1 day from now. And because the weather is so warm right now, I think it should be ready. All right, there we go. I've got about probably an inch or two headspace at the top. And now I'm gonna hook up my bubbler. And this is the thing that makes this an aerated compost tea. If you leave these materials, if you leave it for a day, probably nothing super terrible will happen. If you leave it for too long, it can go anaerobic. We do use anaerobically fermented liquid fertilizers, which are great, but for this exact thing, we're actually trying to keep it aerated, just like a compost, because the compost that we made is aerated, and the same microbes we basically want to keep alive, sticking to the foliage on the plants, and they're just going to do a different thing for the soil. Actually, before I go any further, I'm actually going to add one more ingredient. This is, again, a completely non-essential item, but I'm going to add some of my IMO2, just a tiny little bit, probably a tablespoon like the other ones, and that's just going to add a little bit more diversity. So now let's hook this guy up to our bubbler. So this is our bubbler, our aerator. It's pretty simple. It looks a little complicated, but it's not really. Basically, this is the engine, and it's gonna blow air into this tube, and then it gets split into these 6 different tubes. Now, these are gonna go in the bucket, keep the whole thing bubbling as we go. And we've also got this piece of cardboard that will poke these through, and that way it kind of keeps them all in place. So these are gonna go in the bucket, put a little weight right there. And this particular one doesn't have an on-off switch, so once we plug it in, it'll start aerating. So the bubbles coming off of this are already pretty strong. I might turn off a couple of them, but this actually does look pretty good. The last step is we're gonna cover this so that it doesn't get disturbed by an animal or a small child, more likely, and then we'll check in on it in 24 hours from now. All right, guys, it's been 24 hours, and we're gonna check in on our compost tea. As you can see, we've got this burlap bag over the top, and I'm just gonna take it off so we can get our bubbler out. Okay, so this bubbler worked great, nice and frothy. You can look at this under a microscope and see if it turned out all right. I don't have a microscope, so the main way that I do this right now is just by smelling it. If you kind of followed all the steps and you kept it aerated, this tea shouldn't smell putrid or nasty at all. It should just smell pretty neutral or maybe a little bit earthy. And that's what I'm smelling. It smells very normal. Barely smells like anything. It smells a little sweet. This is totally safe to put on your hands. And it actually just smells great. It smells kind of like woody or earthy. I don't know. And there's a little bit of foam in there, which is great. So the main thing you want to do is once you take the bubbler out, and again, you don't want to let this go more than probably 48 hours. This is just a 24-hour brew. But once you take the bubblers out, you want to use this quickly because the microbes that developed in there can go anaerobic. And I'm just feeling around at the bottom too, just to see if there's any like sediment, and there's not really. It's just very clear. This mixture right here is good to be diluted very lightly. There's really very low levels of nutrients in this. It's actually mostly just the microbes that we're trying to get into our soil and on our plants. So I've got my watering cans. These are both 2-gallon watering cans. So I'm gonna fill it up each of them halfway with this tea. Okay, those are both filled up all the way. And now I'm just gonna use my filtered water, so no chloramine or chlorine, to fill it up the rest of the way. Turn it on. Now I'll just water these in. If this is going to be used as a soil drench, you can totally just apply it undiluted to the bare soil, preferably mulched soil, because then the microbes actually have a chance at survival from the sun. I'm also doing this in the evening, so the sun has nearly set and it's not going to evaporate right away. You basically just want to give these microbes a good chance. And that is how you make a healthy aerobic compost and worm castings tea. If you've got a bubbler, definitely give this one a try. We'll leave a link for where you can buy one on Amazon if you don't have one. This is a very easy and a fast, affordable way to add helpful microbes to your soil, which will then help break down organic matter into bioavailable nutrients for your plants to absorb. This is healthy for soil, plants, humans, everyone. If you have any questions or comments, please drop those below and hit the subscribe button if you want to see more of this kind of stuff in the future. Thanks for watching.